Welcome to Grainger Insights. I'm Jeff Method, and today we're here discussing mitigation, preparedness, and response for active shooter incidents. So we're here with Chris Sonne and Mr. Billy Castellano from HSS-EM Solutions. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So I'm the Director of Emergency Management at HSS. I've been with the company for over 4 years now, and I've been involved in emergency management for over 15.
Billy?
Yeah, I'm the Senior Tactical Instructor with HSS, and I'm a former law enforcement officer. I'm actually retired from the Chicagoland area, and all I do now is travel around the country and teach active shooter response.
And how did you get into the profession?
So I started working in the emergency department at Advocate Lutheran General Hospital on the northwest side of Chicago and worked there for many, many years. And I just kind of found that emergency management and preparedness and safety was an area that I was drawn to. And then as I worked my way through the organization, I stuck with it and found that's really the career path that I wanted to proceed with in my life.
Excellent. What about you, Billy?
Well, I left law enforcement a few years ago to take some contracts overseas with the U.S. Department of State, and while I was overseas, I had been contacted by a level 1 trauma center in the Chicagoland area, and they wanted to revamp their security function, and they wanted to develop an internal response for an active shooter or an armed intruder, and I came home, we did that, we were wildly successful, and that's kind of where things started.
Well, how do you define an active shooter incident?
An active shooter, the FBI definition of active shooter is an armed individual that's actively engaged in life-threatening behavior or attempting to engage in life-threatening behavior in a populated and confined area. Most of the time it's with a firearm, and usually there's no method to their selection of victims.
How does that differ from, say, a hostage situation?
A hostage situation is an armed individual that's holding one or more persons against their will until specific demands are met. And on the face of those two instances, they look very similar.
You know, one of the things with the hostage situations Billy's mentioned before in training, that's actually a fairly stable event that's occurring, even though it has the potential to become a very volatile event. It's fairly stable. And an area of opportunity that we see a lot is when an organization looks to develop an active shooter plan and a hostage plan to make sure they are different, because they are two very different responses and postures that we would take in terms of how our organization and how community partners are going to come in to assist us as well. So those definitions are important to know so we can properly cite our policies and plans behind them.
And it helps to understand law enforcement response to with an active shooter, law enforcement response would be immediate. The first responding police officers would make entry, but with a hostage situation, you might not want that response. You might want a more measured response. The first responding police officer setting up a perimeter, maybe.
How do you get organizations to take active shooter preparedness seriously?
So we've had some great partners that we've worked with in the past in the insurance industry and the underwriting industry that have gone back to them and asked, from a risk perspective, how can we take a look at these events, these training programs, exercises, and how can we mitigate our risks of these events? How can we decrease our overall risk exposure and posture of an organization? So at the end of the day, our fundamental philosophy is we're here to save lives, and we're here to make sure that everyone goes home at the end of the day. On the grander picture of things, we need to look at how we are perceived in terms of our risk posture within the community, within our clients or our customers that we serve, and then what can we do to help mitigate those various risks. So it's kind of a twofold approach.
Yeah, that data-driven approach I think we find to be the most effective, is offering folks the most relevant and contemporary information and helping them make the right decisions in regard to preparing for that.
Okay, and that's a great segue into my next question. What are some of the trends or statistics you think that that folks should be aware of when it comes to active shooter incidents?
So, some things that we've learned: nearly 3/4 of active shooter events are 5 minutes or less. Almost a quarter of all active shooter events are 2 minutes or less. And if you look at average law enforcement response time in the country, depending on what resource you look at, you might find between 10 and 15 minutes. So what that means is those facilities, those employees, those affected folks have an added responsibility. They have a necessity. They need to learn everything they can to protect themselves in the event, because waiting for law enforcement response, statistically speaking, might not be their best option.
The other thing that we see that the instances of how these are occurring are increasing year over year. We haven't seen a steady plateau. There's been a dramatic increase year over year, and part of it is better reporting, how we report these events and the willingness of organizations to report them and law enforcement entities as well. But the other half of it is that they are frankly just happening more often because of the environment that we're living in today.
Okay. Have you observed or are aware of any kind of root causes or issues that are precipitating this rise in active shooter incidents?
We see, it's difficult to profile, but we see some common themes. We see that revenge seeker, that person that's trying to correct that perceived wrong. We see the domestic terrorist related event. We see the planned assault, and more often than not, there are some levels of planning that go into all of these types of attacks, and they don't occur in a vacuum. And so in hindsight, we learn folks saw something and didn't report it, and that kind of brings us to a large portion of what we teach, and that's the mitigation, that's understanding the warning signs and looking for those types of individuals specifically.
Okay.
And the other thing we saw is that with the recession that we had in the United States and across the world, is that as the recession took hold, there were much more of these incidences that took place. There are some industry-specific numbers that some of them saw a twofold or threefold increase in terms of the number of shootings that occurred during that specific time period. Now, unfortunately, as we're starting to recover from the recession in some parts of the country recovering better than others, we're not seeing that plateau or decrease. We're seeing still that growth of these type of events that are occurring.
Okay. Are there any particular, you mentioned a little bit about some of the personality traits. What are some of the other personality traits that active shooters represent? Like
I said, it really is tough to profile. Once we think we have a handle on who we're looking for, we kind of get thrown a curveball. We do see behavioral health concerns coming up time and again as we go back and we dissect an incident. More often than not, we see that folks that perpetrate these crimes have had a history of behavioral health concerns. And that's one of the common things that we see, but it really is tough to pin down one particular personality trait that may lend towards committing a crime like this. 98% of the time, our shooters are single males. We're seeing multiple firearms used more and more, and we're also seeing improvised explosive devices, IEDs, used more, and we're also starting to see body armor as body armor becomes more prevalent. But we know that the folks that commit these crimes aren't typically concerned with their personal safety because maybe they've already written their suicide note or they posted their manifesto. And I think my personal belief is maybe they're wearing body armor to prolong the event.
You know, a lot of our customers, a lot of organizations have developed active shooter programs. Others have not. What type of successes and failures have you seen with organizations that have attempted to develop these plans?
So kind of the best practice when we look to develop this is look at it as a program. You know, it's not just doing an exercise or not just doing a training or not just developing a plan, but it's really to blend all those pieces together. You know, start to make sure you have a fundamental plan, a response plan, a mitigation plan when it comes to an armed threat or active shooter incident within your organization. From that, you can easily develop a training program that's specific and effective for your organization, and then you can look to start to deliver some practical exercises. And those practical area-specific exercises is what we've really seen resonate well with staff when it comes to developing situational awareness and having them kind of practice some of those pieces that they learn through education and training on what their different response techniques are going to look like. One of the biggest issues that we see are people trying to go too big too fast, try to do too large of an exercise, all-encompassing, bringing in law enforcement partners, instead of first really just kind of focusing on your own house and then building up from there. So that crawl before you walk, before you crawl before you walk, before you run.
There you go.
Thank you.
I like to say one of the big failures we see anecdotally is folks sort of taking the test before they've learned the lesson. To Chris's point, they want to have the big showy exercise, that shock and awe training, as it were, before they've actually prepared and trained their staff. And there is a place for exercises like that, absolutely, but it needs to be a measured approach. We need to train our staff first.
Are there any don't do's related to active shooter exercises and trainings?
Some people feel that there's a benefit to have these as unannounced exercises and drills, and we find that absolutely the farthest thing from the truth. The key thing is to communicate these events, whether it's a training event, a practical exercise, whatever it may be. Communicate is the key. You know, whenever we conduct an exercise, we always tell all the participants right off the bat during a safety briefing exactly what they're going to expect. You know, weeks and even months before we conduct the on-site portion, we're communicating with the staff on what they should be able to expect during this exercise so they have a good understanding of what's going to occur, so they're not going to be overly concerned or overly disenfranchised to actually want to come and participate in that event.
Thank you for your time today,
Pleasure, Jeff.
Chris and Billy.
Thank you, Jeff.
Much appreciated.
Thank you.
That's all for today. Thank you for watching Grainger Insights. For more information, visit our Knowledge Center at grainger.com/knowledge.